Back when the school bell rang loud and proud, the scent of fresh pencils and the crisp crackle of new notebooks filled the air. Kids marched off to school with satchels packed full of treasures, supplies that defined an era, now mostly lost to time. Each ruler, each lunchbox had a story to tell. Today, let's dust off the memory shelves and revisit 10 forgotten school supplies from the 20th century that once made classrooms feel like little worlds of their own. Big Chief Tablet. If you ever sat in a 1950s or 60s classroom, chances are your first letters were scrawled across the wide lines of a Big Chief tablet. With its tomato red cover and stoic Native American chief on the front, this thick writing pad was a rite of passage for many young learners. Designed with generous spacing for early handwriting practice, its coarse, pulpy pages soaked up graphite like a sponge. Teachers loved them, parents bought them by the stack, and kids left them filled with crooked letters and earnest spelling tests. Over time, sleeker notebooks and standardized supplies took over, pushing the Big Chief to the back shelf of memory. You can still find one if you dig deep online, but it's no longer a classroom staple. For many, though, seeing that bold red cover is like flipping through the pages of childhood itself. Metal pencil boxes. Before plastic cases and zippered pouches took over, kids carried their pens, pencils, and erasers in sturdy metal pencil boxes. These weren't just containers, they were tiny treasure chests, often decorated with colorful lithographs of race cars, space rockets, or beloved cartoon characters like Felix the Cat or the Jetsons. These boxes clattered open with a satisfying snap and shut with a clink that echoed through many a classroom. Inside, dividers and compartments helped keep things organized, or at least tried to. Some even came with built-in sharpeners or secret sliding drawers. They were often passed down between siblings, dented and scratched, but still functional. By the 1980s, cheaper plastics and mass production led to the decline of these charming cases. They were heavier, prone to rust, and just couldn't compete with the bright, lightweight nylon options that flooded the market. Today, collectors hunt them down at flea markets and online auctions, drawn by their nostalgic artwork and mid-century design. And for anyone who had one, just the sound of that metal latch can bring back the feeling of a cool September morning and a fresh start. Crank pencil sharpeners. Mounted to the wall or the teacher's desk, the old crank pencil sharpener was more than just a tool. It was a classroom ritual. With its shiny chrome face and rotating handle, it turned every dull pencil into a perfect spear, ready for spelling quizzes and math drills. You'd insert your Nummo 2 pencil, crank the handle, and listen to that satisfying whir as the shavings curled into the clear plastic drawer below. Sometimes it took a few tries to get the tip just right too much, and you'd shave it down to a stub. These mechanical marvels were fixtures in schools from the 1930s through the late 1980s. They were nearly indestructible, often lasting longer than the desks they were bolted to. But over time, electric sharpeners and cheap plastic handheld versions took their place. They were faster, quieter, and didn't require mounting hardware. Still, something got lost in the trade. The crank sharpener made you pause, focus, and even gave you a tiny break from your desk. Today, they're still found in vintage classrooms or tucked away in antique shops. And for those who remember the feel of the crank and the scent of fresh pencil shavings, it's like a small time machine back to third grade. Inkwells and fountain pens. Long before ballpoints became the norm, students practiced their penmanship with fountain pens dipped into tiny porcelain or glass inkwells built right into their desks. In the early to mid-20th century, classrooms were filled with the soft scratch of nibs on paper and the occasional blotch from a clumsy refill. Children learned to write carefully, not just for legibility, but to avoid smudging ink or tearing thin pages. Some schools even had ink monitors, students tasked with refilling the wells from a central bottle, usually with deep blue or black ink. These tools taught patience, discipline, and a certain elegance, but they were messy, finicky, and required real skill to use properly. As ballpoint pens became affordable and practical in the 1950s and 60s, Inkwells quickly fell out of favor. Desks were redesigned, and the little round holes once reserved for glass bottles disappeared. Still, vintage fountain pens have made a quiet comeback among enthusiasts, and many antique school desks still bear the dark rings of dried ink around their old Inkwells. For some, the memory of gripping a cool metal nib and watching ink flow onto paper is a link to a slower, more deliberate kind of learning: slide rules. Before calculators fit into pockets, or even existed, students relied on slide rules to tackle math and science. These clever analog devices, made from wood, plastic, or even bamboo, were once essential tools for high schoolers and engineers alike. With sliding central strips and marked logarithmic scales, slide rules could multiply, divide, and calculate square roots or logarithms with surprising accuracy. For decades, they were a symbol of academic rigor, especially during the 1950s and 60s, when the space race made science and math feel downright heroic. Using one took skill and intuition. You didn't just punch in numbers, you had to think. Teachers taught entire lessons around proper slide rule use, and many students kept theirs clipped to their binders in leather sheets. But by the mid-1970s, affordable electronic calculators rendered them obsolete almost overnight. Their reign was short, but meaningful. Today, a vintage slide rule is more curiosity than classroom staple. Still, pick one up and slide the cursor just so, and you might hear echoes of chalk on a blackboard and the hum of a fluorescent-lit classroom where every equation was a small adventure. Mimeographed Worksheets. Long before laser printers and photocopiers, teachers relied on the mimeograph machine to churn out classroom worksheets. These purple ink copies had a smell that's impossible to forget. Sweet, almost chemical, and instantly recognizable to anyone who grew up before the 1980s. You'd walk into the room and catch a whiff of fresh mimeograph sheets sitting on your desk, still slightly damp to the touch. For many kids, that scent became the unofficial fragrance of pop quizzes and homework handout. Mimeographing involved typing or writing on a wax stencil, wrapping it around a drum, and cranking out copies by hand or with an electric motor. The result was slightly smudged, often blurry, but full of character. Teachers would sometimes doodle little drawings into the margins, making each page feel personal. As Xerox machines became affordable and faster in the late 70s and early 80s, mimeographs quietly disappeared from schools. But those soft purple letters and inky fingers left a lasting impression. Some collectors still hunt for old stencils and machines, preserving a piece of educational history that smelled like no other. Book straps. Before backpacks became a staple of school hallways, kids used book straps, simple leather or canvas belts with a buckle, to bundle their textbooks and notebooks into a neat, hand-carried stack. In the 1940s and 50s, it wasn't uncommon to see children walking to school with a heavy pile of books slung over one shoulder, held together by a sturdy strap. Some straps even had handles stitched in for comfort, though most kids just grabbed the whole bundle under one arm and went on their way. Book straps were a practical solution in an era when kids didn't carry water bottles, lunch kits, or gym shoes. All they needed was their homework and maybe an apple, but they were also a symbol of the time, durable, no frills, and built to last. Eventually, as schools assigned more materials and children had farther to walk, the need for more convenient carriers grew. By the 1970s, the modern zippered backpack had taken over, and the book strap quietly vanished from the scene. Today, they're mostly seen in old yearbook photos or antique shops. But for those who remember them, there's something comforting about the simplicity. A time when you could wrap your whole school day into one tight little bundle. Chalkboard erasers and dust clouds. There was a time when cleaning the chalkboard wasn't just a task. It was a coveted classroom honor. Chalkboard erasers, thick felt rectangles with wooden handles, were as much a part of daily school life as recess or lunch. At the end of the day, the chosen student would march up to the board and swipe away the lessons of the afternoon, leaving behind a hazy cloud of white dust. Some lucky kids even got to clap the erasers outside, banging them together until the air was filled with a puff of chalk that drifted like smoke in the sunlight. From the 1920s through the 1980s, chalkboards ruled the classroom. Every math problem, history date, and spelling word appeared in neat rows of white, yellow, or sometimes even green chalk. But chalk was messy. It dried out hands, triggered allergies, and coated everything in a fine film of dust. As whiteboards and dry erase markers took over in the 90s, the humble chalkboard eraser started disappearing. Still, many remember the sound of chalk squeaking against slate and the smell of dusty erasers. It was the soundtrack of learning, Quiet, steady, and always just a little bit messy. Flashcards in cardboard boxes. Before screens and apps took over learning, students mastered their math facts and vocabulary with humble flashcards, often housed in worn cardboard boxes held together with a rubber band. Teachers would pull them out during lessons. Multiplication on one side, the answer on the other, and run through them rapid fire. At home, parents quizzed their kids at the kitchen table, tapping the card with a pencil and nodding when the answer was right. Flashcards were a mainstay in classrooms from the 1930s through the 1980s, especially for memorization-heavy subjects. The cards were usually handmade or bought from brands like McGraw-Hill or Scholastic, printed on thick stock with rounded corners and big, bold type. Over time, they'd soften at the edges, stained from countless hands and classroom floors. But they worked, drilling information until it stuck. Today, they've been replaced by apps, interactive whiteboards, and digital learning platforms. But there was something grounding about flipping through those cards, one by one, in quiet focus. Some vintage sets still survive in attics and school basements, little stacks of knowledge from a slower, more tactile world. School desk Inkwell desks with lift-up lids. In classrooms of the early to mid-20th century, students didn't just sit at their desks, they stored their whole school world inside them. These classic lift-top school desks, often made of solid oak or maple, featured heavy hinged lids that opened to reveal a sloped writing surface and a cavernous space beneath for books, lunch pails, and secret notes. Some even had a small circular hole at the top, an inkwell holder from the days when fountain pens ruled the classroom. There was a rhythm to these desks. The soft creak of wood as lids lifted, the thud as they dropped shut, the rustle of papers hidden beneath. Carved initials and doodles covered the inside lids, marking the passage of generations. But as schools modernized, these bulky built-in desks gave way to lighter stackable models with metal legs and separate chairs. By the 1970s, the lift-up desk had mostly vanished. Today, they're found in antique stores or repurposed as quirky home decor. But for those who remember them, these desks weren't just furniture. They were little wooden forts of focus and daydreams, where spelling lists and secret crushes shared the same space. Sometimes it's the smallest things that leave the biggest imprint. A squeaky crank sharpener, the scent of fresh mimeograph ink, the feel of a fountain pen gliding across paper. These forgotten school supplies weren't just tools. They were part of the rhythm of growing up, woven into the texture of childhood itself. Though they faded from classrooms, they still live on in memory, in the creak of an old wooden desk, or a dusty box found in the attic, filled with flashcards and stubby pencils. We'd love to hear from you. Did you use any of these in your school days? Which one brought back the strongest memory? Or maybe there's a special item we didn't mention that still lives in your heart. Drop your stories in the comments. And if this little trip down memory lane warmed your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more nostalgic journeys. And tell us, what school supply from your past would you give anything to hold just one more time?